What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I want to talk about a fight that took place January 24th, 1940, between two outstanding fighters. Pedro Martinez, one of the best Puerto Rican fighters of all times, and Henry Armstrong, I have him ranked number 4 as the greatest fighter of all times. Now, I want to go through this fight with you, but I also want to get into Henry Armstrong's career, because I believe he's underrated, he's unappreciated. And hopefully by the end of this conversation, you'll have a better understanding as to why I feel the way I do with Henry Armstrong. Like I said, I have him ranked number 4 of all fighters. I have Sam Langford number 1, Harry Greb number 2, Ray Robinson number 3, and Henry Armstrong number 4. So we're going to get into that with Henry Armstrong's career. But let's talk about this fight. But I want to get into Pedro Martinez to set up why this was an outstanding fight between Pedro Martinez and Henry Armstrong. Now, Pedro Martinez was born April 24th, 1914 in Puerto Rico. He died June 26, 1996. He was 82 years of age at the time of his death. He died in Puerto Rico. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Pedro Martinez. He was an outstanding person. Spoke to me about his career, his life, about the men around at his time, in and out of the ring. He spoke about the Depression. It was very hard times coming up for Pedro Martinez. But he managed to get through, and he goes to show what it takes sometimes in order to make it in life. And I want to go through his career with you so you have a better understanding of how important this fight was to not only Pedro Martinez, but with Henry Armstrong as well. Now, Pedro Martinez began his professional debut February 1st, 1931, and he would face Antonio Melendez. He would defeat him. And that would be a very great start to Pedro Martinez's career. March 23rd, 1936, he would face Bobby Pancho, very good fighter. Fought him at St. Nicholas Arena. Now, St. Nicholas Arena was on 66th Street off of Broadway. It was across the street from Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center is a jazz place. Wynton Marsalis and his brother, they had ran that jazz location for a very long time. But across the street was St. Nicholas Arena. It looked like a movie theater. It was developed in the 1920s. It was originally an ice skating rink. Eventually went out of business in the 70s. I think it was 1972, somewhere around there. But all the great fights were held at St. Nicholas Arena. And Pedro Martinez and Bobby Pancho fought that night, March 23rd, 1936. And Bobby Pancho had a fighting career record at that time of 58, 28, and 11. So that was a very good fight and victory for Pedro Martinez. March 27th, 1936, he would face a fighter by the name of Aldi Spaldi. Fought him at St. Nicholas Arena as well. Aldi Spaldi at that time had a ring career record of 33, 15, and 4. Now, Aldi Spaldi was a very interesting character. I'll go through his career more when I talk about Henry Armstrong's career, because he played a significant role in 1937 in his fight with Henry Armstrong. May 15th, 1936, he would fight a fighter by the name of Leonard Del Gino. Fought him in Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden was the mecca of boxing at that time. It was in Manhattan. Now, it had moved 4 different locations. Right now, it's on 33rd and 34th Street between 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue. They call it Hell's Kitchen. But Madison Square Garden was all over. It was on 50th Street. It was on Madison Avenue, various locations in New York. But it was the mecca of boxing for many years. And he would fight him May 15th, 1936. Now, at that time, Leonard Del Gino had a career record of 30 with 6 losses with 6 draws. He would defeat him. Another great win for Pedro Martinez. Frankie Click. Outstanding fighter. He was a champion himself. And Pedro Martinez would face him, Dyckman, Oval, and Manhattan. Now, that's close to 200th Street near Van Cortlandt Park. It's not there anymore. But you would take the 1 train straight up Broadway, and that would take you to Dyckman, Oval, Manhattan. It's borderline Bronx and Manhattan. Now, he fought him June 8th, 1936. At that time, Frankie Click had a career record of 84-16-12. March 5th, 1937, he being there with Lou Ambers. Fought him in Madison Square Garden. Lou Ambers was a two-time champion. He would defeat Tony Canzoneri as well as Henry Armstrong. He would lose his lightweight championship strap to Lou Jenkins. And he would face Pedro Martinez March 5th, 1937. At that time, Lou Ambers had a career fighting record of 64-4-6. And Pedro Martinez would defeat him. He would defeat Wesley Ryan at Gilmore Stadium, July 26, 1937. Wesley Ryan had a career record at that time of 113-17 with 13 draws. He would defeat Wesley Ryan. August 16, 1937. Pedro Martinez was fighter by the name of Freddie Red Cochrane. They fought him at the Braddock Bowl in New Jersey. And this was August 16th, 1937. Now, all this was going on while Henry Armstrong was doing his thing. And like I said, when I go through his career, you'll understand about the 1937 career of Henry Armstrong. Now, at that time, Freddie Red Cochrane had a career record of 27-22-4. Freddie Red Cochrane was a welterweight champion. He was a pretty decent fighter. And Pedro Martinez would defeat him. He would defeat Tommy Spingal, another very, very good fighter. Fought on February 7th, 1937. At that time, Spingal had a career record of 37-7-5. March 25th, 1939, he would face young Peter Jackson. Young Peter Jackson was a phenomenal fighter from the Pacific Coast. He had admired the Black Prince Peter Jackson and Peter Jackson in the 1930s. Fascinating fighter was young Peter Jackson. Now at that time, young Peter Jackson had a career record of 58-17-5. Outstanding. He would face Davy Day. Davy Day would be a featherweight champion. He would lose his title. Actually, it was actually vacant. To Sammy Engot. In fact, I did a profile on Sammy Engot. Type in Sammy Engot Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, and you'll learn a little bit more about Sammy Engot. Well, he fought him in Madison Square Garden. And Davy Day had a career record at that time of 56-6-4. He would lose to Davy Day. He would also lose to Henry Armstrong, the man we're talking about now. And at that time, Henry Armstrong had a career record of 106, 13 losses with 6 draws. He fought him in Madison Square Garden. And that was a phenomenal fight between Henry Armstrong and Pedro Martinez. I have that fight on reel to reel at home. I watched it several times, and I got to tell you, both men were in high spirits, and there was a lot of action taking place in that fight. So I just want to go through some parts of Pedro Martinez's career, and hopefully you can appreciate him, because he was an outstanding fighter and humanitarian. Now, Henry Armstrong, he was originally named Henry Jackson. He was Medley Jackson in his first career. He had 2 different careers. He didn't do too well as Medley Jackson, so he would leave the professional ranks, go back to amateur, come back. He had a trainer by the name of Harry Jackson, and he would borrow the last name. I'm sorry, his trainer was Harry Armstrong. I don't know why I'm getting this confused. Harry Armstrong was the trainer for Medley Jackson. So Harry Armstrong would loan his last name to Henry Jackson, who was Medley Jackson originally. And so it became Henry Armstrong at that point. I hope I didn't confuse you. All this is at the top of my head, so I'm just trying to remember as I'm speaking with you. I know he was born December 12, 1912 in Columbus, Mississippi. He died October 23rd, 1988. I had the pleasure of meeting him. Spoke to him for at least an hour. And at that time, he was kind of forgetful, but what I found is interesting, when I used to go on my tours, because I belonged to an organization and we used to go to different nursing homes, find fighters, and we'd be able to talk with them, bring them food, make them feel a lot better. And I spoke with Henry Armstrong, and he told me a lot of stories. Because a lot of the fighters, they may forget in life, but when it came to boxing, they remember their whole career. It's amazing. And he told me a lot about his career. And he was from Los Angeles, California. And his nickname was Homicide and Hurricane Hank. He stood 5'5", and he had a 67-inch reach. He was entered in the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1954 and International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. He had a career record of 152 wins, 22 losses, 101 knockouts. He was stopped himself twice, one by Almino and the other one with Fritzy Zivic. He had 9 draws. He had total bouts of 183. That's incredible. 183 total bouts. Now, the thing with Henry Armstrong, by the time he graduated high school, he was 17 years of age. He came around during the Great Depression. And he and Joe Louis had similar backgrounds. Both their fathers were ill. And so they had to go to work early. They quit school. And they had to start trying to figure out ways to help their mother and their family out. Now, Henry Armstrong, his plans were to go to college. But he had to quit college. And he would eventually go to work. And he would work at the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And he would get a regular wage. But he was fed up after a while, doing the same thing over and over again. He saw no ceiling. It was just, he wasn't going anywhere. But what he got out of that job, it was so physical that it developed his shoulders and his neck and his back. And he became very, very tenacious. And he could last longer than anybody else because it turns out that Henry Armstrong had an enlarged heart. And it was able to pump blood vessels a lot faster. And so that he had more stamina. And he was an unbelievable specimen, was Henry Armstrong. So while he was working on the railroad, a newspaper hit him in the leg. And it was Kid Chocolate. And he defeated Benny Bass. And he would earn $75,000 for that one night's work. And that was it for Armstrong. He ran away from the job and he began to be a hobo like Jack Dempsey and a lot of fighters at that time. And he would basically take the train, and it took him over to California. And it took him to California, and at that point, he began looking for work in California. He would wash dishes. He would do various things. And eventually, he began his amateur career. This was at the St. Louis Coliseum, 1929. And he would be knocked out in a matter of a few seconds. Now, after 7 more amateur fights, Armstrong moved to Pittsburgh to pursue a professional career. And he was ill-prepared and unnourished. And Armstrong lost his first professional fight by a knockout. And he did manage to win the second fight on points. However, he decided to return to St. Louis. And in 1931, Armstrong accomplished by Henry Armstrong. Now, Henry Armstrong, like I said, wound up becoming his trainer. And he took the last name Armstrong and connected it with Henry. So that's how Henry Armstrong was born. And he hopped on trains to Los Angeles, and he restarted his amateur career. And before you know it, he started doing very well. He would have over 100 amateur fights. He would get paid $3 for the majority of his fights. And he had to win in order to earn the $3. And that would get him food and hotel stay and everything else. And it got to a point where he would start fighting at the Olympic Auditorium. Now, Olympic Auditorium was on Hollywood Boulevard, or Hollywood Lane, I believe it was. It was between Hollywood Lane and It was a cross street. And a lot of famous celebrities used to go to this place. And eventually he would run into George Raft and Al Jolson. Now, Al Jolson was a Hollywood act. And they liked what they saw, and they thought that they can do something with Henry Armstrong. Because Henry Armstrong was very tenacious, never stopped throwing punches. And he was a two-fisted fighter. Unbelievable fighter was Henry Armstrong. And it got to a point where George Raft and Al Jolson, they discovered him, and they introduced him to Eddie Mead. Now, Eddie Mead used to handle fighters. Eddie Mead was part owner of Barney Ross. And what Al Jolson did was he offered Eddie Mead to buy out the remainder of Barney Ross's contract. Barney Ross had 2 more fights on his contract. And Barney Ross really didn't want to fight anymore. He'd been through wars with Jimmy McLaurin and others, and he just didn't want to fight anymore. But he had a fighting spirit like none other. He was a Jewish lightweight from Chicago, and he would be in there with outstanding fighters. A lot of fighters came from Chicago. And Barney Ross was some fighter. So what happened was, Eddie Mead had posted the $5,000 that he was going to buy out Barney Ross's contract. But Al Jolson had posted $10,000. So when they bought out Barney Ross's contract, Barney Ross demanded the other $5,000. So what Al Jolson did was he paid Barney Ross to sign with him for the last 2 fights. And connecting with that, he would be able to buy out the contract of Henry Armstrong. If I didn't lose you in that. It was a shrewd business deal. So now Al Jolson became part of the original team with Eddie Mead. It was 50-50 partnership. And what was interesting about that, let me read you some stats. Let me just come up with some stats in my head. 1937, he would be 27-0 with 26 knockouts. In that same year, 1937, he would defeat Petey Sarin. Petey Sarin was a featherweight champion, and he would knock him out in 6 rounds. And that was the only time Petey Sarin would be knocked out. 1938, Henry Armstrong would be 14-0 with 10 knockouts. From December 1936 to September 1940, Henry Armstrong would have a fighting record of 59-1-1. I'm talking between 36 and 1940. And he would have 51 knockouts. So he would be 59-1-1 with 51 knockouts. All top names. 1938, he would take the welterweight championship away from Barney Ross. In that same year, he would go back down in weight and face Lou Ambers. And he would defeat him in 15-round brutal bout. He was actually thinking about stopping that fight because Henry Armstrong was cut up in his lip. And he kept bleeding. So eventually he would take out his mouthpiece and he would swallow his own blood just to finish the round. And he would win the lightweight championship. So he would have all 3 titles at the same time. Now what happened in 1937, Joe Louis had knocked out James Braddock. Knocked him out in 8 rounds. And he became the second black heavyweight champion of all times. And when Joe Louis became the heavyweight champion, all the colored titles had dismissed. And so Joe Louis was a phenomenon. And Al Jolson and Eddie Mead was trying to figure out a way to eclipse him because he was still in the spotlight. So they decided to have Henry Armstrong fight for 3 world titles. Now, Eddie Mead still had Barney Ross 2 fights in his contract. So that fight was easy to make. So from that point, Henry Armstrong was a 3-time world champion. And he began his professional debut July 27, 1931 against Al Avilo. And he had a fighting record of 7-6-3. And he would lose his first fight. But he would continue on with Perfecto Lopez, fighting him 5 separate occasions. Davey Abad fought him at the Olympic Auditorium. Fought him, won twice and 1 loss. Baby Arizmendi. That's what got Al Jolson and Joel Raft to discover Henry Armstrong. And he would face Baby Arizmendi 5 separate occasions. I have Baby Arizmendi in my top, I'll say 11 greatest Mexican fighters of all time. He would face Tony Chavez, Richie Fontaine, Perfecto Lopez, Alton Black, very good fighter, Benny Bass. These are all champions I'm going to be thinking about right now. Seferino Garcia, Midget Wargas, Mike Belois, all champions, Petey Cerrone, Pedro Martinez, Tippy Larkin, Ernie Ruddock. Now, Ernie Ruddock would be champion in Britain. Albert Chalky Wright. He would lose his title to Willie Pep, but Chalky Wright was an outstanding Mexican fighter. Paul Jr., Lou Feldman, Eddie Zivic. He would be the brother of Fitzy Zivic. Eddie Zivic would win an Olympic title back in around 1924. Juan Zarita. Juan Zarita would take the title from Sammy Engot, but he would lose his title to the great Ike Williams. Richie Fontaine, Barney Ross, Lou Jenkins, Ray Robinson, Lou Ambers, Bo Jack. Look at the names that I'm spitting out here. Sammy Engot. These were the list of champions that Henry Armstrong would face. Now, what's interesting about the Lou Ambers fight, it was over 20,000 fans in Madison Square Garden. It was a 15-round match. He fought him August 17, 1938. That's phenomenal. He would fight Frankie Click. Armstrong was 138 pounds in the contract in order for him to even get that fight with Barney Ross. And he was just 126 pounds. And with a matter of weeks, he had to drink so much water and beer. It's crazy. But he was able to make the weight. And he would last 15 rounds with Barney Ross, and he would get him to retire. Fascinating accomplishment that Henry Armstrong would have. Now, he would fight Barney Ross at the Long Island Bowl. It was located in Long Island City, New York. Fought him in 1938. And Barney Ross was a 3-1 favorite to defeat Armstrong because Armstrong was a featherweight. And most people lost their money on that fight. He would face Petey Cerrone, October 29, 1937, in Madison Square Garden. Now, Al Jolson paid Petey Cerrone $15,000 to accept the fight. Petey Cerrone's last fight was with Sammy Engot. And Henry Armstrong would be the first black featherweight champion of the United States. Now, you had George Dixon, who was the champion of Canada. And you had Kid Chocolate, who was originally from Cuba. And what role all those men played in Armstrong's career was that George Dixon discovered shadowboxing. He was the creator of shadowboxing. And Kid Chocolate inspired Henry Armstrong when a newspaper hit Armstrong in the leg. So Henry Armstrong owes it to both those men. Before every major championship fight, Henry Armstrong was shadowboxed for 15 rounds before he walked into the ring with Bo Jackson, Lou Ambers, and Barney Ross, and Lou Jenkins, and Ray Robinson, and Lou Feldman, and Eddie Zivic, and Juan Zarita, Tippy Larkin, Petey Cerrone, Pedro Martinez, Midget Wargas, Benny Bass, Seferino Garcia, Albert Chalky Wright. I mean, it's amazing what this man has accomplished. Henry Armstrong had faced fighters such as Chester Slider, Aldie Spaulding, Willie Joyce, Lucia Slugger White, Al Bummy Davis, Ralph Zanelli, Aaron Perry, Jimmy Garrison, Sammy Angot, Al Turner, Phil Furr. I mean, it's amazing. Charlie Burns, Ruben Shane. Ruben Shane turned out to be a middleweight when he faced Rocky Graziano. Bobby Pancho, Everett Reitmeyer, Paul Jr., Johnny Taylor. I mean, it's amazing. Armstrong would defend his welterweight championship 5 times in October, 1 month, in 1938. Now, some people don't want to credit Armstrong for 5 fights. They want to credit him for 4 fights. Because there was a fighter by the name of Jimmy Garrison. I'm not going to get into that. People are so nitpicky when it comes to certain things. But Jimmy Garrison was an opponent. He was in a ring with Henry Armstrong. So it's 5 title defenses in the conversation. It's amazing. But Henry Armstrong was some fighter, and I just wanted to basically touch on his career. And hopefully you appreciate it. I want to go through a few stats with you. Henry Armstrong had a KO percentage of 55.8%. He had a chin. A chin and a body attack like you won't believe, 79%. Power punching was 71%. I mean, it's crazy. He boxed over 1,156 rounds. He was only stopped twice, to Alvino and Fritzy Zivic. Let me touch on that Fritzy Zivic fight for a minute. October 4th, 1940, he would face Fritzy Zivic in an attempt to defend his welterweight championship strap. This was in Madison Square Garden. On the undercard, he had Ray Robinson and Ray Escoveria. Ray Robinson that same year had defeated a fighter by the name of Spider Valentine, Louis Valentine. They were good friends in Harlem. But Louis Valentine was the man in Harlem at that time. And Robinson would defeat him in the 1940 Golden Gloves in a lightweight division. And he'd be on the undercard of that Henry Armstrong and Fritzy Zivic fight. And I gotta tell you, Fritzy Zivic was basically thumbing Armstrong. He knew how to grab him by the neck. He knew how to hit him low on the opposite side of the referee. He knew how to heal him. At that time, you didn't tape up the laces of the gloves. The laces were exposed. And he knew how to heal him, basically rake his eyes. Because Armstrong had already suffered a cut. He had lacerations from prior fights. He knew how to spin him around on the ropes. He was a very dirty fighter. Out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was Fritzy Zivic. He had 5 brothers. It was 5 of them combined. So they knew the tricks of the trade. So Fritzy Zivic was some fighter. He lost 65 fights or so. But he was a veteran in the ring. But Armstrong had been in there with everybody. So getting to the Pedro Martinez and Henry Armstrong fight, that was some fight. Because Pedro Martinez could box. He was a very, very good boxer. Fast on his feet, fast with his hands. And he knew how to control the action. But when he was in there with Armstrong, it was an impossible task. Because Armstrong was perpetual motion. He was consistently charged at you body and head. Now what Armstrong used to do, he would control you with his head and with his left shoulder. He would stay right in front of you on the side of your body. And he would angle you with his head. He would throw very short right hooks. Very short right hooks. So he would keep his head on the left side of your face and move his head immediately when he threw the right hook. Now, you don't think of a right hook from an orthodox boxer. But Armstrong wasn't really an orthodox boxer. He would come straight to you. He would bob and weave up and down, from side to side. He would never stop throwing punches. He would look at your feet and tell what position your body was in and what you were vulnerable to at that time. Before you had a chance to get set, you were either hit or you were pressured to move. Soon as you hit the ropes, he would throw about 3 or 4 or 5 punch combinations at you. He would walk you down all over the ring. And this would go on round after round until you either collapsed or you'd be so far behind on the scorecards, either it would stop the fight or you had no chance on winning. But Henry Armstrong was a fascinating fighter. I just wanted to go through his career with you as I discussed this fight with Pedro Martinez and Henry Armstrong. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, stating all great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thanks for hanging in there with me. With this monumental fight, an outstanding fighter. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Salute.